Welcome aboard the rising word air, where every flight takes you into the serene skies of Japanese literature and peaceful dreams. This is your captain Alexander Harrow speaking. Welcome aboard the rising word air, where tonight we embark on a journey into the enigmatic and ethereal world of Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams. This masterpiece is a collection of surreal and thought-provoking stories, each crafted from dreams experienced by the literary genius himself. Over the course of 10 nights, these dreams unveil profound themes of love, death, time, and the unfathomable depths of the human soul. Within just a few pages, Soseki invites you into a realm where reality and fantasy intertwine in extraordinary ways. But this is no ordinary chronicle of dreams. It is a contemplative exploration, a whisper from Soseki himself, prompting us to ponder life's fleeting nature, the truths hidden in the corners of our minds, and the alternate realities we often overlook. Fasten your seatbelts and let your imagination soar as we delve into these 10 short yet profound tales. May you discover a spark, a question, or a truth nestled deep within your own heart. Prepare for takeoff, and let us journey together through the dreams that await. Chapter 1. The First Night. This is the dream I saw. I sat by her bedside, arms crossed, watching as she lay there, speaking in a calm voice. "I will die soon," she said softly. Her long hair spread across the pillow, framing a delicate melon-shaped face with soft contours. Her pale cheeks held a faint blush, and her lips glowed a healthy red. She didn't look like someone close to death, yet her voice was clear, unwavering. "I will die," she said again, and somehow I knew it to be true. "So, you're going to die?" I asked, leaning in to look at her face more closely. "Yes, I will," she replied, opening her large, moist eyes. Encircled by long lashes, her gaze was entirely black, dark and deep, like an endless void. Within her pupils, my own reflection shone vividly. Looking into those profound eyes, transparent and deep, I thought to myself, can she really die like this? So I bent down, close to her pillow, and asked again, "Are you sure? Won't you be all right?" Still gazing at me, she replied, "But I will die. There's no avoiding it." Her voice remained calm, even as her heavy eyelids seemed to droop with weariness. "Can you see my face?" I asked, almost pleading. "See it?" she replied, smiling faintly. "Look, there you are, reflected right here in my eyes." I said nothing, pulling back from the pillow. Arms still crossed, I thought. Is she truly going to die? After a moment she spoke again. "When I die, bury me. Dig my grave with a large pearl shell. Then place a fragment of a fallen star above me as my marker, and sit beside my grave waiting for me. I will return to you." "When will you return?" I asked. "The sun will rise, and it will set. Then it will rise again and set again," she said. "As the red sun moves from east to west, again and again, will you wait for me?" I nodded silently. She raised her voice slightly with an air of determination. "Wait for me for 100 years, she said. "Stay by my grave for 100 years and I will come back to you." I simply answered, "I will wait." At that moment the reflection of my face in her dark pupils blurred, like a ripple disturbing the surface of still water. Her eyes closed gently, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. She had passed away. I went outside to the garden and began to dig a grave with the pearl shell. The shell was smooth and sharp-edged, glinting in the moonlight with each scoop of damp earth. The scent of wet soil rose around me. When the grave was ready, I gently laid her body inside and covered her with soft, loose dirt. With each handful of earth, the moonlight glimmered on the shell. Then I found a fragment of a fallen star and placed it lightly atop the grave. The fragment was perfectly round. I thought, perhaps it became smooth and polished after falling through the heavens for so long. As I lifted it, my chest and hands grew warm. Sitting on the moss-covered ground beside her grave, I thought, now I will wait here for 100 years. Arms crossed, I watched the round, glistening stone marking her resting place. As she had said, the sun rose in the east, large and red, and slowly set in the west. 1, I counted. Soon another crimson sun appeared on the horizon, only to slip away again. 2, I counted. And so it went. The suns rose and set countless times. I lost track of how many I had counted. 100 years still had not passed. Watching the moss-covered stone, I began to wonder, did she deceive me? Just then, from beneath the grave marker, a green stem emerged, growing quickly. It stretched until it reached the height of my chest. At its tip, a bud swelled, and slowly its petals unfurled. A pure white lily blossomed, its fragrance piercing and profound. From the sky above, a single drop of dew fell onto the flower, causing it to sway under its weight. I leaned forward, pressing my lips to the cold, dewy petal. As I lifted my face, I glanced at the distant sky and saw the morning star shining alone. 100 years have already passed, I realized for the first time. Chapter 2, The Second Night. This is the dream I saw. After leaving the monk's chamber, I walked along the corridor back to my room, where a faintly glowing lantern awaited me. Kneeling on one knee atop a cushion, I adjusted the wick. Just as I did, a delicate clove flower drifted down and landed softly on the red lacquered stand. In that instant, the room brightened slightly. Hanging on the sliding door was a painting by Busen. It depicted black willows, shaded with varying depths of ink to create a sense of perspective. Beneath the trees, a fisherman walked along an embankment, bundled against the cold with his straw hat tilted low. In the alcove hung a scroll titled, "The Bodhisattva Manjushri Crossing the Sea." The faint scent of incense lingered in the air. The large temple was utterly silent, with no trace of human presence. The round shadow of the lantern flickered against the dark ceiling, moving as though it were alive. Lifting a corner of the cushion, I reached beneath it and found what I was looking for. Relieved, I replaced the cushion and sat down firmly on top of it. "You are a samurai, aren't you?" the monk had said earlier. If you are truly a samurai, you should have no trouble attaining enlightenment. Yet, here you are, struggling. Perhaps you're no samurai at all. You're nothing but a disgrace to humanity. He had laughed and added, "If you're so frustrated, then bring me proof of your enlightenment. Otherwise, don't bother me." With that, he turned away, leaving me fuming. Such arrogance. But I swore to myself, before the clock in the adjacent hall struck its next chime, I would attain enlightenment. Then I would return to his chamber, with both enlightenment and his life as my trophies. If I failed to achieve enlightenment, I would end my own life. For a samurai, it is better to die than to live in disgrace. That thought set my resolve. My hand instinctively reached beneath the cushion, drawing out a short blade sheathed in a crimson scabbard. I gripped the hilt tightly and unsheathed the blade. Its cold, gleaming edge caught the faint light of the lantern. I felt an ominous force escape from the blade, as if something terrible had fled toward the tip. All of its energy seemed to gather there, coiling into a single deadly point. As I stared at that sharp edge, now condensed with pure intent, a violent urge to pierce my own body surged through me. Blood rushed to my right hand, making my grip sticky and damp. My lips trembled. I returned the blade to its scabbard and set it beside me. Then crossing my legs I sat in meditation. Zhao Zhou said, "Mu." What is mu? Damn that monk! I gritted my teeth. Clenching my jaw tightly, I exhaled hot, ragged breaths through my nose. My temples throbbed painfully. I opened my eyes wider than ever before, as though to force the answer into view. The scroll, the lantern, the tatami mat, even the round, bald head of the monk appeared vividly in my mind. I could almost hear his mocking laughter, the sound of his crocodile-like mouth opening wide in derision. That insufferable monk! I swore to strike his head from his shoulders. I had to achieve enlightenment. Mu! Mu! I repeated the word in my mind like a mantra, clinging to it desperately. Yet even as I focused on Mu, the faint scent of incense still lingered. What is this? I thought bitterly. Even incense is a distraction. In a sudden burst of frustration, I balled my fist and struck my own head with all my strength. My teeth ground together violently as sweat poured from my armpits and my back stiffened like an iron rod. The joints of my knees throbbed painfully, but I didn't care if they broke. Still, the pain was unbearable. Mu refused to reveal itself. Each time it seemed close, it slipped away, leaving only agony in its place. Anger surged within me. Helplessness followed. Tears streamed down my face as I longed to throw myself against a great rock, shattering my body into pieces. Yet I endured. I sat, unmoving, though the torment inside me grew unbearable, pressing against every muscle, seeking release through my pores. It was as though I were a sealed vessel, filled to the brim with boiling water, with no outlet for the steam. After a time my mind began to unravel. The lantern, Buson's painting, the tatami mat, and the staggered shelves of the room blurred together, their existence neither certain nor denied. But Mu was nowhere to be found. I was simply sitting there, lost in some ambiguous state. Just then, the clock in the neighboring room began to chime. Startled, I grabbed the short blade beside me as the second chime rang out, resonating in the stillness. Chapter 3. The Third Night. This is the dream I saw. I was carrying a 6-year-old child on my back. It was undoubtedly my own child, but something was strange. His eyes were blinded, and his head was shaved clean like a monk's. "When did you lose your sight?" I asked. "Long ago," he replied. His voice was that of a child, but his tone and manner of speaking were mature, almost equal to mine, as though we were speaking on the same level. On either side of the narrow path stretched fields of green rice paddies, their edges softened by the shadows of night. Occasionally the silhouette of a heron would cut across the darkness. "We've entered the paddies," he said from my back. "How can you tell?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder. "The herons are crying," he replied, and sure enough, a heron let out 2 sharp cries. A shiver ran through me. Though this child was my own, I began to feel afraid of him. Carrying him further seemed dangerous, as though something ominous would happen. I searched for a place to leave him, and noticed a large forest emerging from the darkness ahead. Perhaps there, I thought. Just then the child laughed softly. "He? What's so funny?" I asked. He didn't answer my question. Instead he asked, "Father, am I heavy?" "No, you're not heavy," I replied. "Well, you will be," he said. I said nothing more, fixing my gaze on the forest and quickening my pace. The path, winding unpredictably through the fields, slowed me down. After some time I came to a fork in the road and paused to rest. "There should be a marker stone here," the child said. And indeed there was. It was a waist-high stone column, about 8 inches square. The inscriptions on it read, "Left Higekubo, right Hotahara." Even in the darkness the red characters stood out vividly, the color resembling the belly of a newt. "Take the left path," the child commanded. I turned left and saw the forest casting long shadows over us, its looming canopy obscuring the sky. I hesitated. "Don't be shy," he said. "Just go." Reluctantly I started toward the forest. As I walked I thought, for someone blind he knows a lot. The path became narrower, the darkness thicker. "Being blind is such a burden," he muttered from my back. "That's why I'm carrying you, isn't it?" I replied. "I appreciate it," he said, "but it's humiliating to be treated like a fool, especially by my own father." I felt uneasy, even disgusted. I wanted to reach the forest quickly and abandon him. "We're getting close. It was a night just like this one," he murmured. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice sharp with tension. "You know what I mean," he said mockingly. Suddenly a vague memory stirred within me. I felt like I did know what he meant, but I couldn't fully grasp it. I only knew that something significant was waiting ahead. Terrified of discovering what it was, I pressed forward, determined to rid myself of this child before I understood. Rain began to fall, making the path darker and slicker. I stumbled forward in a daze, barely aware of where I was going. The child, clinging to my back, was like a mirror, reflecting my past, my present, and my future, and that he was mine, my own blood, made the weight unbearable. "Here," he said suddenly, "right here, beneath that cedar tree." Through the rain his voice was unnervingly clear. I stopped in my tracks. Somehow I had entered the forest without realizing it. A short distance ahead I could make out a dark silhouette. A cedar tree, as he had said. "This is the spot, isn't it, Father?" "Yes, it is," I admitted without thinking. It was the 5th year of Bunker, the year of the dragon, wasn't it? I couldn't argue. It felt true. 100 years ago you killed me here," he said. At his words, the memory flooded back, a memory of murdering a blind man beneath this very tree, on a night just like this, in the 5th year of Bunker. I killed him, I realized. I am a murderer. As the full weight of the truth struck me, the child on my back grew heavier, his body as dense and immovable as a stone statue. Chapter 4. The Fourth Night. This is the dream I saw. In the middle of a spacious earthen floor, there was a platform like a summer resting bench, surrounded by small chairs. The platform gleamed with a dark lustre. In one corner, an old man sat alone, a square tray before him, drinking sake. His side dish seemed to be simmered vegetables. The old man's face, flushed red from the alcohol, shone with a healthy sheen. Not a single wrinkle could be seen, though his long white beard revealed his age. Even as a child, I found myself wondering just how old this man might be. At that moment, a woman, presumably the hostess, came in from the back, carrying a pail of water she had fetched from the bamboo spout. Drying her hands on her apron, she asked, "Grandpa, how old are you?" The old man swallowed his bite of simmered vegetables and replied with a calm demeanor, "I've forgotten how old I am." The woman tucked her dried hands into her sash and stood, gazing at the old man's face. The old man picked up a large cup, nearly as big as a bowl, and gulped down some sake before letting out a long sigh through his white beard. The woman then asked, "Grandpa, where is your home?" The old man paused his sigh midway and answered, "At the navel." Still standing, with her hands tucked into her sash, the woman asked again, "And where are you going?" The old man took another gulp of sake, then replied, "That way." "Straight ahead?" the woman inquired. At that, the old man let out a long breath again. This time his sigh passed through the paper screens beneath the willow tree and stretched straight toward the river bank. The old man stepped outside, and I followed him. A small gourd hung from his waist, and a square box was slung over his shoulder. He wore light yellow trousers and a sleeveless jacket of the same color. His tabi, however, were yellow and appeared to be made of leather. The old man walked straight to the willow tree, where 3 or 4 children had gathered. Smiling, he took a light yellow hand towel from his waist, twisted it into a long, thin cord, and laid it in the center of the ground. He then drew a large circle around it with his foot. Finally, he opened the box on his shoulder and took out a brass flute. "Watch closely. This towel will turn into a snake. Just wait and see," just wait and see," he said, repeating the words. The children stared intently at the towel, completely absorbed. So did I. "Watch carefully," he said again, as he began to play the flute, circling the towel over and over. But the towel didn't move at all. The old man continued playing his flute, moving around the circle as if tiptoeing, his steps cautious, almost as if he feared the towel. His movements were unsettling, almost eerie, but somehow intriguing. Eventually, the old man stopped playing. He opened the lid of his box, picked up the towel, and tossed it inside. "Now it will turn into a snake in the box. I'll show you soon, I'll show you soon," he said, and began walking straight ahead again. The old man passed beneath the willow tree, following a narrow path, and finally reached the river bank. Hoping to see the snake, I trailed after him. "Now it will happen. The snake will appear. It's certain," he sang, repeating the lines as he walked into the river. At first the water reached only his knees, but soon it rose to his waist, then his chest, until finally his beard, face and head disappeared beneath the surface. I stayed by the reeds, thinking he would emerge on the opposite shore and reveal the snake. I waited alone for a long time, but the old man never returned. Chapter 5. The Fifth Night. This is the dream I saw. It was a time long past, as though from the age of the gods. I had been defeated in battle, taken captive, and dragged before the enemy's general. In that era, all the people were tall, with long flowing beards. They wore belts of leather, from which hung swords that resembled straight, heavy rods. Their bows were crafted from raw wisteria vines, unpolished and lacquer-free, primitive in their simplicity. The enemy general gripped the center of his bow with his right hand, planting it firmly into the grass. He sat upon something that resembled a large sake jar. His face was striking. His thick eyebrows met above his nose in an unbroken line. Of course, razors did not exist in those days. As a prisoner, I was not permitted to sit on a stool like the general. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the ground. My feet were clad in deep straw sandals that reached up to my knees. At the ends, the straw had been left partially unbraided to form decorative tassels that swayed with every step. The general gazed at my face in the flickering light of the campfire and asked, "Will you live, or will you die?" This was customary at the time. Every prisoner was asked this question. Answering live meant submission, while answering die signified defiance. I answered with a single word, "Die." The general threw his bow aside and began to draw the sword from his waist. The blade gleamed in the firelight as it caught the wind. Without hesitation, I raised my right hand, palm outward at eye level, a signal to stop. The general paused, then slowly returned his sword to its scabbard. Even in that distant age, love existed. Before I died, I wished to see the woman I loved one last time. The general granted my request, agreeing to wait until dawn. But if she did not arrive by the time the rooster crowed, I would be killed. The night deepened. Occasionally, the campfire would collapse, sending a cascade of sparks toward the general, illuminating his piercing eyes. Far away the woman was riding a white horse, galloping with all her might to reach me. The horse exhaled fiery breaths from its nostrils, and her long hair trailed behind her like a banner in the darkness. As she raced through the night, a rooster's crow echoed through the air. At that moment, she pulled hard on the reins. The horse staggered, its hooves scraping the rocks as it stopped at the edge of a deep ravine. Losing balance, it toppled forward, and together they plunged into the abyss. The marks left by the horse's hooves remained etched into the stone. It was later revealed that the rooster's crow had been imitated by a trickster spirit, the Amanojaku. The hoof prints would endure forever, a haunting reminder of that night, and the Amanojaku would forever remain my sworn enemy. Chapter 6. The Sixth Night. This is the dream I saw. I heard that Unkei was carving a statue of Neo at the gate of Gokokuji Temple, so I decided to take a stroll and see it for myself. By the time I arrived, a large crowd had already gathered, chatting enthusiastically about the work. Just 5 or 6 ken, about 9 to 11 meters, from the temple gate stood a grand red pine tree. Its trunk stretched diagonally, partially obscuring the temple roof before continuing upward into the distant blue sky. The vivid green of the pine and the vermilion-painted gate complemented each other, creating a stunning view. The placement of the pine was perfect, naturally extending from the left edge of the gate at an angle, its width expanding as it reached toward the roof. The scene carried a distinctly ancient charm, reminiscent of the Kamakura period. Yet the onlookers were all unmistakably people of the Meiji era. Among them, rickshaw pullers were most prominent, likely killing time while waiting for customers. "What a massive thing," someone remarked. "Must be a lot harder than making a person," added another. Others spoke in amazement. "Wow, a Neo statue. They're still making those? I thought all Neo statues were ancient." One man, his trousers hitched up and hatless, said with excitement, "Looks strong, doesn't it? They say nobody's been stronger than Neo, not even Yamato Takeru." This man seemed entirely uneducated, a simple laborer, judging by his appearance and speech. As for Unkei, he appeared completely indifferent to the spectators' chatter. Standing on a scaffold, he focused solely on moving his chisel and mallet, never once glancing at the crowd. His sole focus was the statue's face, which he carved with tireless intensity. Unkei's appearance was archaic. He wore a small hat resembling an eboshi, and had tied the large sleeves of his robe behind his back. The scene was jarringly out of place amidst the noisy crowd, his presence a stark contrast to their bustling energy. Watching him, I couldn't help but wonder, how is it possible that Unkei is still alive in this era? It was a thought that lingered as I stood there, captivated. However, Unkei himself seemed entirely unperturbed by the mystery of his longevity, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He continued his work with unwavering dedication. A young man standing nearby turned to me and said, "As expected of Unkei, he sees none of us. His entire world consists only of himself and the Neo. It's extraordinary." I found his words intriguing and looked at him as he continued. "Watch the way he uses the chisel and mallet. He's reached a state of absolute mastery, entirely free in his art." Unkei was carving a thick eyebrow, carefully slicing it out to a precise height of just 1 inch. Then, with a deft motion, he turned his chisel vertically and struck it with his mallet from an oblique angle. As the tools struck the wood, shavings flew, and the side of an angry nose emerged, sharp and imposing. His movements were so bold, so free of hesitation, that it was breathtaking. I can't believe how effortlessly he uses that chisel to shape eyebrows and noses exactly as he envisions them, I murmured to myself, unable to contain my admiration. The young man overheard and replied, "No, he isn't shaping them. The eyebrows and nose were already buried within the wood. All he's doing is uncovering them with his chisel and mallet. It's no different from excavating a stone buried in the earth." Hearing this, I felt as though I had just understood the essence of sculpture for the first time. If that were true, I thought, anyone could do it. A sudden urge to carve a Neo of my own seized me, and I left the scene to return home. From my toolbox I fetched a chisel and mallet and headed to the backyard. There, remnants of a storm-felled oak, cut into logs for firewood, were neatly stacked. Choosing the largest log, I enthusiastically began carving. Yet there was no Neo to be found in the first log, nor in the second. Even the third yielded nothing. One by one, I carved through the entire pile of logs, but none concealed a Neo within them. Finally, I realized that the trees of the Meiji era contained no Neo. At that moment, I also understood why Unkei alone remained alive to this day. Chapter 7. The Seventh Night. This is the dream I saw. I was on a great ship, a vessel so vast it seemed boundless. Day and night without pause, it belched black smoke as it cut through the waves with an ominous roar. But no one knew where it was headed. From beneath the waves, a blazing sun like a fiery brand would rise. It would climb to the height of the ship's towering mast, hang there for a while, and then, almost imperceptibly, move ahead of the ship, leaving it behind. Finally, with a sizzle, it would sink once more into the depths of the ocean. Each time this happened, the blue waves in the far distance would erupt into hues of deep crimson, as if stirred by the sun's descent. The ship roared in pursuit of the sun's path, but it could never catch up. One day, I grabbed one of the crewmen and asked, "Is this ship headed west?" He gave me a puzzled look, staring at me for a while before asking in return, "Why do you ask?" "Because it seems like we're chasing the setting sun," I replied. At this he burst out laughing and walked away without another word. Does the westward-bound sun eventually return to the east? Could that truly be? And does the eastward-rising sun call the west its home? Could that also be true? The sailors sang a strange chant as I wandered to the prow, where I found a group of them hauling thick ropes attached to the sails. A deep sense of unease overtook me. Would I ever set foot on land again? Where were we even going? The only certainty was that the ship kept moving forward, black smoke pouring into the sky as it cut through the waves. The sea stretched endlessly, an overwhelming expanse of blue, sometimes tinged with purple. Only the area immediately surrounding the ship was ever frothy white, churned by its relentless progress. Loneliness weighed heavily on me. The thought of leaping overboard and ending it all crossed my mind. There were many other passengers, most of them foreigners, each with faces that seemed utterly distinct. During one stormy moment when the ship rocked under a grey sky, I saw a woman leaning against the railing, crying. She dabbed her eyes with a white handkerchief, though her body was clothed in what appeared to be a sarasa-patterned dress. Watching her, I realized sorrow was not mine alone. One night, I stepped onto the deck to gaze at the stars. A foreign man approached and asked if I knew astronomy. But what use was knowledge of the stars when I was already considering throwing my life away? I said nothing. The man began speaking about the 7 stars atop the Taurus constellation. He told me that the stars, the sea, everything was created by God. At the end he asked, "Do you believe in God?" I looked up at the sky and remained silent. On another occasion, I entered the saloon. A young woman in a flamboyant dress sat with her back to me, playing a piano. Beside her stood a tall, impressive man singing a song. His mouth seemed enormous. But the two were completely absorbed in each other, indifferent to the world around them, as though they had forgotten they were even on a ship. I felt more alienated than ever. My resolve to die solidified. Late one night, when no one was around, I made up my mind and leapt into the sea. The instant my feet left the deck, severing my connection to the ship, an overwhelming fear of death gripped me. From the depths of my soul, I regretted my decision. But it was too late. I was powerless to stop my descent into the ocean. The ship was so tall that even though I had left it, my feet hadn't yet touched the water. But with nothing to hold on to, I continued to fall, inching closer to the dark waves no matter how much I tried to pull my legs back. The water was black. Soon the ship moved on, black smoke trailing into the distance. In that moment, I understood. Uncertain as its destination might have been, it was far better to stay aboard. Yet I couldn't act on this realization. Paralyzed by infinite regret and terror, I sank quietly into the dark waves. Chapter 8. The Eighth Night. This is the dream I saw. I stepped over the threshold of a barber shop. 3 or 4 men, dressed in white robes, greeted me all at once with a chorus of "Welcome." The room was square, with windows on 2 sides and mirrors hanging on the other 2 walls. I counted 6 mirrors in total. I approached one of them and sat down. The seat let out a soft plop, and I realized it was surprisingly comfortable. My face reflected clearly in the mirror, with the window behind me, and I could see the cashier's counter positioned at an angle through the reflection. There was no one behind the counter. Through the window, I could see passers-by, their upper bodies visible as they strolled by. Shotaro walked past with a woman. At some point he had acquired a Panama hat, and the woman too had dressed herself up quite nicely, though I had no idea when this had happened. Both of them looked rather pleased with themselves. As I tried to get a closer look at the woman's face, they disappeared from view. Next, a tofu seller blew his brass horn as he passed by. His cheeks were puffed out, swollen like he'd been stung by a bee because of the effort of playing the horn. He disappeared down the street, still puffed up, and the sight stuck with me as something strange and unsettling, like he'd been stung by a bee for eternity. Then came a geisha. She had yet to put on her makeup. Her Shimada hairstyle was coming loose, making her head look untidy, and her face was pale and groggy, lacking its usual charm. She bowed slightly, muttering some kind of greeting, but the person she was addressing never appeared in the mirror. A large man in a white robe approached me from behind, carrying scissors and a comb. He studied my head, and I twisted my thin mustache as I asked, "Well, do you think there's hope for it? Can it be made into something worthwhile?" Without a word, the man tapped my head lightly with an amber-colored comb. "Well, what about my head? Will it do?" I asked again, but the man remained silent and started snipping away with a steady rhythm of snip, snip. Determined to watch every move reflected in the mirror, I kept my eyes wide open. But with each snip, black strands of hair flew through the air, and I began to feel uneasy. Eventually, I closed my eyes. "Did you see the goldfish seller outside?" the man in white suddenly asked. "No, I didn't," I replied. He said nothing more and continued snipping. Suddenly a loud voice shouted, "Watch out!" Startled, I opened my eyes. Through the man's sleeves I saw the wheel of a bicycle and the shaft of a rickshaw. Then the man pressed down on my head and turned it sharply to the side, making the bicycle and rickshaw vanish. The snipping resumed. Soon the man moved to the side of my head and started trimming near my ear. No more hair flew toward the front, so I felt reassured and opened my eyes. "Rice cakes, get your rice cakes," a voice called nearby. I heard the sound of a small pestle rhythmically tapping the mortar as they pounded the cakes. It had been years since I'd last seen a rice cake vendor, and I wanted to catch a glimpse. But no matter how hard I tried, the vendor never appeared in the mirror. Only the sound of the pounding reached me. I strained my eyes to peer into the corner of the mirror. Suddenly, I noticed someone sitting behind the cashier's counter. It was a large woman with dark skin and thick eyebrows. Her hair was styled in an ichogaishi, and she wore a simple suwa-awas kimono with a black satin collar. Sitting on her knees, she was counting what appeared to be 10-yen bills. She worked quickly, her long eyelashes lowered, and her thin lips tightly pressed together. Despite her speed, the pile of bills never seemed to diminish. There were perhaps only 100 notes on her lap, but no matter how many she counted, the pile remained the same. I stared at her and the money in astonishment. Then, the man in white loudly announced, "Time to wash up." Seizing the opportunity, I stood up and turned back to look at the counter. But the woman and the bills were gone. After paying my fee, I stepped outside. Near the entrance, 5 oval tubs were lined up, each filled with goldfish, red ones, mottled ones, skinny ones, and plump ones. Behind them sat the goldfish seller, resting his chin on his hand as he stared at the fish in front of him. The bustling street seemed to hold no interest for him. I stood there for a while, watching the goldfish seller. But no matter how long I looked, he didn't move an inch. Chapter 9. The Ninth Night. This is the dream I saw. The world seemed to be stirring with unrest, as if war might break out at any moment. Like wild, scorched horses running unchecked around a manor day and night, with foot soldiers frantically chasing after them, such was the feeling in the air. Yet within the house everything was eerily calm and quiet. Inside lived a young mother and a 3-year-old child. The father had disappeared. He had left late one moonless night, wearing straw sandals and a black hood, slipping out through the back door. The dim light of the paper lantern the mother held stretched into the pitch-black darkness, faintly illuminating an old hinoki tree near the hedge. The father never returned. Every day the mother asked her child, "Where is your father?" At first, the child didn't answer. After a while, they began to say, "Over there." When the mother asked, "When will he come back?" the child would still reply, "Over there," smiling as they did so. The mother too smiled then, and taught the child to repeat the phrase, "He'll come back soon," over and over, but the child only remembered soon. Sometimes, when asked again, "Where is your father?" the child would reply, "Soon." At night, when the surroundings grew quiet, the mother would tighten her sash, tuck a short dagger with a sharkskin scabbard into her belt, and carry the child on her back, tied with a thin sash. She would slip out through the back door. She always wore straw sandals. Sometimes, as the child listened to the sound of the sandals, they would fall asleep on her back. Heading west through the rows of walled estates, she descended a sloping road until she came to a great ginkgo tree. Turning right at this landmark and continuing for a short distance, she would reach a stone torii gate. On one side of the path were rice fields, and on the other dense kumasasa grass. Passing through the torii, she entered a dark grove of cedar trees. Walking another 20 paces along a stone-paved path, she arrived at the steps of an old shrine hall. A grey-washed offertory box stood at the base of the steps, with a large bell cord hanging above it. By day, one could see a plaque nearby, reading Hachiman-gu. The kanji for 8 was stylized to look like 2 doves facing each other, an interesting design. Other plaques hung there as well, mostly commemorating archery targets struck by members of the shrine's retainers, with their names attached. Some even enshrined swords. Owls always hooted from the cedar branches as she passed through the torii. Her straw sandals made soft, wet sounds that stopped only when she reached the shrine. There the mother would first ring the bell, then crouch down and clap her hands in prayer. The owls usually fell silent at this point. Then, with unwavering concentration, she would pray for her husband's safety. She believed that, as the samurai's wife, beseeching Hachiman, the god of war and archery, with such fervent devotion would surely yield results. Often the sound of the bell woke the child, who would open their eyes to see nothing but darkness all around. Frightened, the child would cry out from her back. The mother, murmuring prayers under her breath, would sway gently to soothe them. Sometimes it worked. Other times, the child's cries only grew louder. Regardless, the mother would not rise easily. After finishing her prayers for her husband's safety, she would untie the sash and bring the child around from her back to her arms. Holding them close, she would ascend the shrine steps, saying softly, Be a good child and wait here for a little while," rubbing her cheek against theirs. Then she would lengthen the sash and tie the child to the shrine's railing, before descending the steps again to begin her Oyakudo, walking the 20 paces of the stone path back and forth 100 times. Tied to the shrine, the child would crawl around the veranda within the length of the sash. On such nights the mother found some relief, but if the tied-up child cried loudly, the mother grew anxious and her steps quickened. Breathing heavily, she would sometimes abandon the count and climb back up the steps to console the child before resuming her prayers. Night after sleepless night, the mother prayed and worried about her husband's safety. Unbeknownst to her, her husband had been killed long ago by a wandering swordsman. This was the sorrowful story the mother told me in a dream. Chapter 10. The 10th Night. This is the dream I saw. On the 7th evening, after Shotaro had been abducted by a mysterious woman, he unexpectedly returned home. Ken-san came to inform me that Shotaro had suddenly developed a fever and collapsed into bed. Shotaro was known as the most handsome man in the neighborhood, a man of utmost honesty and good nature. He had only one peculiar hobby. Wearing his Panama hat, he would sit outside a fruit shop every evening, gazing at the faces of passing women with great admiration. That was his one distinguishing trait. When few women passed by, he would turn his attention to the fruit on display. Peaches, apples, loquats, bananas, beautifully arranged in baskets, ready to be taken as gifts, lined neatly in 2 rows. Shotaro would remark on how lovely they looked, often saying that if he ever ran a business, it would surely be a fruit shop. Yet he never bought any of the fruit, nor did he ever eat it for free. He merely admired its colors. One evening, a woman unexpectedly appeared at the shop. She seemed to be of high social standing, dressed in exquisite attire. The colors of her kimono captivated Shotaro, and her face impressed him even more. Taking off his prized Panama hat, he politely greeted her. The woman pointed to the largest fruit basket and said, "I'll take this one, please." Shotaro immediately handed her the basket. She held it briefly and remarked on its weight. Being an easygoing man with plenty of free time, Shotaro offered, "Allow me to carry it to your home." With that, he left the shop with the woman and did not return. His prolonged absence caused his relatives and friends to worry. Even for someone as carefree as Shotaro, disappearing for so long was unusual. Just as they were starting to panic, Shotaro returned on the 7th evening, seemingly unbothered. A crowd gathered, bombarding him with questions. "Shosan, where on earth have you been?" they asked. Shotaro casually replied, "I took a train to the mountains." It must have been a very long train ride, based on his account. When he got off the train, he found himself in a vast plain, stretching endlessly with nothing but green grass. As he walked across the grass with the woman, they suddenly reached the edge of a towering cliff. The woman turned to Shotaro and said, "Jump off from here." Peering over the edge, Shotaro could see the steep cliff face, but the bottom was invisible. Taking off his Panama hat, he politely declined multiple times. The woman then said, "If you don't take the leap, you'll be licked by pigs. Is that acceptable to you?" Shotaro detested both pigs and Kumoemon, a local trickster figure. However, valuing his life more, he hesitated to jump. Just then a pig approached, snorting. Left with no choice, Shotaro used the slim walking stick he carried, made of areca palm, to strike the pig's snout. The pig let out a grunt and rolled off the cliff. Relieved, Shotaro was catching his breath when another pig appeared, pressing its large snout against him. He struck again, and the second pig tumbled down the chasm. Yet another pig appeared, and this time, looking up, Shotaro noticed countless pigs, tens of thousands perhaps, streaming from the far edge of the grassy plain toward him in a straight line, all snorting as they approached the cliff. Terrified, but with no other option, Shotaro mustered all his courage and continued to strike each pig on the snout, sending them tumbling into the abyss. Strangely, as soon as his stick touched a pig's snout, it would roll off the cliff without resistance. Looking down, Shotaro saw an endless line of pigs falling head first into the unseen depths. As he realized how many pigs he had dispatched into the chasm, a sense of dread crept over him. But the pigs kept coming, like a black storm cloud with legs, trampling the green grass as they surged forward in infinite waves. For 6 days and 7 nights, Shotaro fought relentlessly, striking pig after pig. Eventually, he was utterly spent, his strength drained to the point that his arms felt as weak as jelly. Finally, he could fight no more, and one pig managed to lick him. Defeated, Shotaro collapsed at the cliff's edge. Ken-san, after recounting Shotaro's tale, concluded with a warning. "That's why it's best not to pay too much attention to women." I couldn't help but agree. Still, Ken-san expressed a desire to inherit Shotaro's Panama hat, saying, "It's a nice one, isn't it?" Shotaro likely wouldn't recover. The Panama hat would undoubtedly become Ken-san's. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived at the final destination of tonight's journey. As the last words of this story linger, we invite you to close your eyes and let the calm embrace of sleep take over. Thank you for flying with the rising word air, where timeless Japanese literature guides you into peaceful dreams. Until our next flight, may your rest be deep and your dreams filled with wonder.